Got laid off Tuesday. Then my landlord said my brother paid him $500 to evict me early. Turns out my whole family planned it, said I needed tough love. Slept in my car, lost everything. One call later, by Monday morning, they were begging outside McDonald's. The message came through while I was still half asleep, lying on the couch surrounded by takeout boxes and job rejection emails. Need to talk. Urgent. That was from my landlord, Alan. Nothing unusual about it. The hot water had been temperamental for weeks. I figured it was about that. When I called, his voice sounded tight. Evan, I'm sorry, man. This is awkward. My stomach dropped before he even said the next words. Your brother, Mark, offered me $500 to terminate your lease early. Said I needed to have you out by Saturday. I thought I misheard him. Wait, what? Yeah, Alan said. He was real insistent. Said it was a family thing. Look, I don't like it, but the money's good and legally he's not wrong. Your lease allows early termination if the tenant's in transition. Transition, I echoed. His words, not mine. You got 48 hours, man. I'm really sorry. I hung up and just sat there, staring at my phone. My own brother had paid a stranger to kick me out of my home. For $500. I called Mark immediately. He answered on the second ring, sounding like someone picking up a prank call. Bro, what's up? He said, voice full of fake cheer. Why the hell did you pay my landlord to evict me? I asked. There was a pause and then laughter, actual unbothered laughter. You finally found out, huh? He said. Relax. It's just tough love. Mom and Dad said you needed a push. Tough love. I repeated, shaking. I just lost my job, Mark. I know, he said lightly. That's the point. You've been coasting. Mom says you won't change until you hit bottom. Couldn't breathe. You're insane. He chuckled again. You'll thank us later. When I called my parents, Dad didn't even sound guilty. Of course we told him to, he said. You've been stagnant, Evan. Sometimes you've got to burn down the house before you rebuild. I have nowhere to go, I said. That's the idea, he replied calmly. Mom's voice came on the line. Maybe a few nights on the street will motivate you, she said. Her tone was so casual it made me sick. You've been too comfortable for too long. Can I stay with you? I asked. Just for a week until I... Absolutely not, Dad cut in. Our home is for people who try. That sentence. Our home is for people who try. Replayed in my head all night. My sister, Emily, texted an hour later. Honestly, maybe this will be good for you. You've been stuck too long. Love ya though. Mark just sent me a laughing emoji. By Friday, the locks were changed. My stuff, my clothes, laptop, even my old guitar, sat in boxes in the hallway like trash waiting for collection. I loaded what I could into my dented Honda Civic and parked at the edge of a Walmart lot. That night, I slept in the car, wrapped in a hoodie that smelled like stale coffee and panic. I woke up with a parking ticket on my windshield and only $187 left in my checking account. Meanwhile, my family group chat was blowing up. Photos of wine glasses and vineyard selfies. Napa Valley. My parents, Mark, and Emily, grinning like a Christmas card while I sat in the front seat of my dying car, homeless because of them. That morning, when the tow truck came, because apparently my car had unpaid tickets from months ago, I didn't even fight it. I just watched as they hooked it up and drove away, everything I owned disappearing down the street. I walked to the nearest McDonald's for Wi-Fi and warmth, bought a coffee I couldn't afford, and stared at my reflection in the black plastic lid. Then I made one phone call, just one, to a man named Peter Vaughn, my grandmother's lawyer. And what Peter told me about the house my parents were living in, the house I'd grown up in, was going to change everything. 4 years before all this, I moved back to Fresno, California, to take care of my grandmother, Ruth. She had late-stage pancreatic cancer, and the rest of my family was too busy. Dad had his consulting firm. Mom ran her home staging business. Mark was in grad school for finance, and Emily was working in marketing up in San Jose. That left me, the underachiever who worked IT support and never made enough to brag about at dinner parties. Grandma didn't need bragging rights. She just needed someone to help her get out of bed, remember her meds, and talk to her like she was still a person. So I moved in. I quit my decent-paying job and took a remote one that paid less but kept me near her. For 2 years, I was her caretaker, nurse, and tech support, all rolled into one. She used to tell me, "You've got the kindest anger I've ever seen." I didn't understand it then. I do now. When she passed, the house, that big old Craftsman on Pine Avenue where I grew up, became a silent museum of every memory we'd ever made. The family showed up for the funeral. Everyone was suddenly sentimental. Mark gave a speech about legacy that made Mom cry. Dad spent the reception bragging about how much the house would sell for. But a week after the funeral, I got a call from Peter Vaughn, Grandma's lawyer. He told me something that knocked the air out of me. She had left the house to me. Not to Dad, not to Mom, me. He explained she had written the will herself, had it notarized, and left a note to go with it. In it, she said, "Evan gave me his time when no one else did. This house belongs to him, not out of obligation but out of love." Peter said he could transfer the deed right away. But I didn't do anything. My parents were already living there. They'd moved in years earlier when Dad's business hit a rough patch. Felt cruel to kick them out. So I didn't. I told Peter to keep the paperwork quiet. I let them stay rent-free. I paid the property taxes myself every year, roughly $4,000 annually, and handled maintenance costs, roof repairs, pest control, all of it. I told myself it was just what family did. I even covered a couple of Dad's temporary expenses from his firm, about $3,000 here and there. Never got paid back. Didn't care. It wasn't about money. It was about love, the kind I thought families were supposed to return. The irony is, they never asked me how I afforded it. They just assumed the house was theirs. They redecorated, painted over Grandma's wallpaper, rented out the basement for extra income. They never once said thank you. Sometimes, I'd visit, and Mom would say things like, "Oh, Evan, you should have taken business classes like Mark. You're too smart to be fixing people's printers." Dad would just nod like she'd said something profound. I remember one Thanksgiving. Mark cornered me in the kitchen, drink in hand, and said, "You know, Mom and Dad might put you on a payment plan to stay here someday." Payment plan. I just smiled and kept basting the turkey. So, when Peter told me that the title was still legally in my name alone, I felt something click. Something that had been waiting quietly for years. Because all this time, I'd been paying for their comfort. All this time, I'd been financing the people who thought I was beneath them. Peter asked, "Do you want to file the ownership confirmation?" Simple. You just need to sign one form. I said no back then. But sitting in that McDonald's with a cold coffee and nowhere to sleep, I told him yes. And then I asked him something else. Something I hadn't thought about in years. The business loan Dad had taken out 8 years ago. The one I had co-signed when I was barely 20 because he said it would help build my credit. Peter pulled up the record. Dad still owed nearly $48,000, and I was still legally attached. That's when Peter's voice got quiet. "Evan," he said, "if you wanted to, you could call in your share. Demand repayment immediately. If he can't pay, it'll trigger a default." It would hit him hard. I stared at the window, the reflection of fluorescent lights in the coffee's surface. For the first time, I didn't feel like the family disappointment. I felt like the fuse they'd spent years lighting, finally ready to burn. By Monday morning, I was still sitting in that McDonald's booth, the same one where I'd spent the entire weekend charging my phone, using free Wi-Fi, and replaying every cruel word my family had ever thrown at me. When my phone rang, I knew exactly who it would be. Dad. He called 3 times before I answered. "Evan," he said, breathing fast, "we need to talk. Right now." "About what?" I asked. He hesitated. Peter sent something over. Something about the house. I didn't respond. Then he shouted, "What did you do?" Behind him, I could hear Mom's voice rising in panic. Mark and Emily were probably hovering nearby. They must have all gotten the same call from the lawyer. "I did what you should have done years ago," I said. "I took responsibility." He said my name again like he was scolding a child. "You can't do this. This isn't what your grandmother wanted." I could hear papers rustling on his end, the sound of their entitlement unraveling. "She left the house to me, Dad," I said. "You've known that deep down this entire time. You just didn't think I'd ever do anything about it." He started talking fast, the way he does when he's losing control. "Let's discuss this in person. We'll figure something out." "There's nothing to figure out," I said. "The eviction notice is already filed. You have 30 days. Silence. Then Mom's voice. "Evan, sweetheart, you can't possibly think." I cut her off. "You told me to sleep on the street. So yeah, I can." When I hung up, I felt something strange. Not guilt, not anger, just calm, like a switch had flipped. By the end of the day, I'd signed every document Peter sent. The ownership transfer confirmation, the eviction notice, and the repayment demand for the $48,000 business loan. All sent out electronically, legally clean. If they wanted to play tough love, I could be tougher. That afternoon, I called the impound lot where my car sat. The clerk said it would cost nearly $500 to retrieve it. Money I didn't have. And then I remembered something Peter mentioned. My brother Mark had co-signed that loan. If I stopped making payments, it would wreck his credit score. I asked Peter if there was any legal way around that. "There doesn't need to be," he said flatly. "The system will take care of it." I thought about that for a long time. 3 hours later, I got a text from my sister, Emily. "Mom's freaking out. Dad says you filed something with a lawyer? Please tell me it's not true." I didn't answer. Then another came through from Mark. "You're making a mistake. You can't win this." Funny. That was exactly what Dad said when I told him I wanted to go into IT instead of business. And when Grandma was dying and I moved in with her, Mark had said, "Don't waste your 20s playing nurse." Every cruel thing they'd ever said started clicking into place like puzzle pieces I hadn't been able to see before. This wasn't about love or disappointment. It was about control. They didn't want me to grow. They wanted me dependent, grateful, easy to manipulate. Well, that version of me was gone. A few days passed quietly. No calls, no texts. Then Thursday afternoon, as I sat on the library steps eating a $1 burger, Peter called. "Evan," he said, "they've all been served. 30-day notice on the property. Loan demand issued to your father's company. Expect calls." "Good," I said. "And Evan," he added softly, "I have to tell you something else. You may want to sit down." I was already sitting. "When your father took that loan," Peter continued, "he used the house as collateral. But legally, the house wasn't his to use. You were the title holder. That could qualify as loan fraud." I felt my pulse in my ears. "So what happens if the bank finds out? If he can't refinance in time, they'll investigate. It could ruin him." There was a pause. Then Peter said, "Do you want me to report it?" I looked up at the sky, gray, washed out, cold. "Not yet," I said. "Let's give him a chance to feel the floor drop before we pull the rug out." That night, I slept in a motel parking lot with my phone buzzing nonstop. Unread messages piling up. They were realizing, finally, that they'd pushed the wrong person. And I wasn't going to stop, because this wasn't just payback. This was justice. The next week was quiet, too quiet. I figured they were scrambling, trying to find a lawyer or some loophole to undo what I'd started. But by Wednesday, I got my answer in the ugliest possible way. Peter called again. His tone was different this time, sharp, tense. "Evan, I need you to come to my office. There's something you should see." When I got there, he had a folder waiting. He slid it across the desk and didn't say a word. Inside was a printout of an email chain. The sender? My father. The recipients? A realtor and a local developer. The emails dated back 6 months. 6 months before the eviction. They had already been planning to sell the house. Not rent it. Not refinance it. Sell it. In the thread, my dad had told the developer that the property was currently occupied by a family member who could be easily relocated. He wrote, "We'll clear him out when the time is right. We just need him gone before the sale closes." My stomach twisted as I kept reading. There was an attached offer, $380,000 in cash. And then another attachment, a pre-signed agreement with both my parents' signatures. Not mine, of course. Fake signatures. Forged. Peter exhaled slowly. Evan, they weren't planning to just kick you out. They were planning to sell the house and keep the money. I couldn't speak. My skin went hot, then cold. You're sure it's them? Yes, Peter said. They used your grandmother's old notary seal. It's technically illegal, but they must have thought no one would ever find out. I just sat there, shaking. They were going to erase me. Peter nodded. They probably thought you'd never check the records, that you didn't know your legal rights. That's when everything clicked into horrifying focus. The tough love eviction. Mark bribing my landlord. Mom saying I needed to hit rock bottom. They weren't trying to teach me a lesson. They were trying to clear me out of the way. I asked Peter what would have happened if I hadn't called him when I did. He said, the sale would have gone through in less than a month. You would have had no legal claim left once the paperwork hit escrow. They were days away from signing. I felt sick. He looked at me carefully. Do you want to press charges? I shook my head. Not yet. I want them to feel everything collapse first. That night, I drove back to the same McDonald's. Same booth. Same spot where I'd been when all this started. My phone lit up with messages from Emily. Can we talk? Mom's losing it. You don't understand the pressure Dad's under. I didn't reply. Instead, I texted Mark. How much did Dad promise you from the sale? Took less than a minute for him to call. You don't know what you're talking about, he snapped. Oh, I think I do, I said. You were going to get your student loans paid off, weren't you? That's why you helped kick me out. His silence told me everything. Mark, he finally said, it wasn't supposed to be like this. Dad said you'd be fine. Fine. Sleeping in my car. Watching tow trucks take my life away. Fine. I let him talk. Rambling excuses about financial opportunities and helping the family move forward. It was all business jargon for betrayal. When he paused, I said, tell Dad I know about the forged documents. He went quiet. How? Let's just say Grandma's lawyer finally earned his paycheck. Mark tried to regain control, his voice tightening. You can't prove... Mark, I interrupted. I don't have to prove anything. I just have to own what's already mine. And you're all about to learn how that feels. By Friday, the fallout began. Peter called again, sounding almost apologetic. The developer backed out after I sent them proof of your ownership. But that means your parents are now facing breach of contract penalties. They owe nearly $25,000. I didn't even flinch. Let it happen, I said. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. That weekend, my family started blowing up my phone. Dozens of calls. Begging, bargaining, threatening. I ignored everyone, because now I finally understood the truth. They hadn't wanted to teach me anything. They had wanted to erase me. And now, they were the ones disappearing piece by piece, under the weight of their own lies. I sat on the hood of my Civic that night and made a list like a man making a grocery list for ruin, short, legal, and merciless. First, secure the house. I had already filed the ownership confirmation and the eviction. Peter told me to change the locks, so I did. I walked back to Pine Avenue at dusk, took the key Peter had couriered me, and turned it in the doorway of the place I'd paid for when no one else would. Standing there in the empty living room where Grandma used to hum while she folded laundry, I felt something like relief. Not victory, not yet, but the satisfaction of reclaiming what was mine. Second, let the bank and the loan demand do their job. Peter had already sent the formal demand for my portion of the co-signed loan. If Dad couldn't refinance or pay, the bank would accelerate. That would put pressure on the business partner, the developer, whoever else had a stake in the contracts Dad bragged about at dinner. I didn't need to be the executioner. The legal machine would do it for me, and I preferred my hands clean. Third, expose the falsified sale attempt. Peter and I compiled a packet, the forged realtor agreement, the email chain between Dad and the developer, and the notary seal Dad had used. We filed a complaint with the county, uploaded copies to the realtor board, and drafted a short, factual letter to the developer's legal department outlining the fraud. No accusations, just evidence and questions. Who authorized this? Who signed? It was surgical. I wanted the developer to know why the deal had evaporated. Because if their contracts fell apart, the ripple would reach my parents' doorstep. Fourth, build a paper trail. I created a folder with screenshots of the family group chat, Alan's text about the $500 payment, Mark's laughing emoji, Mom's few nights on the street line, every little thing they'd said that showed intention. Peter said this would matter if things escalated into civil court. He told me that judges like patterns. Families hiding behind we thought it was for his own good rarely hold up when confronted with clear, consistent evidence. Fifth, keep the moral high ground. I refused to press criminal charges right away. That didn't mean I wouldn't. For now, however, I wanted the narrative to be mine. If the time came, I would file for fraud. For now, I would let the consequences, financial penalties, damaged contracts, clients pulling out, play out while I stayed squarely in the sunlight of truth. Every time Mark texted, "You're making a mistake," I pictured him saying it in depositions. I spent the next days doing small, practical things that felt like armor. I opened a separate bank account for the settlement money I hoped would come. I emailed HR at the company I'd interviewed with and explained my start date situation, being honest without dramatics. I applied for a few more jobs. I slept in my house some nights, the sound of my own keys in the lock finally familiar instead of alien. They tried manipulation, late-night apologies, fake calm, a dozen tearful voicemails. Dad called begging for time. Mark pleaded about his credit. Emily sent a text that sounded like it had been written by Dad. I answered none of it. I let them flail. Let them scramble the way they'd made me scramble. Then, 2 weeks after Peter showed me the forged realtor emails, he called me in the middle of the night and said something I didn't expect. "You might want to sit down," he said. I sat down on purpose this time. "What did you find?" I asked. There was a pause, and then Peter said, "Your grandmother left a clause in her will. It's unusual, conditional, and if it's enforceable, it changes everything about what they tried to do." The hair on my neck lifted. I felt the list in my pocket locks, bank, board complaints, tilt toward something else. Peter wouldn't tease me if it didn't matter. "What kind of clause?" I whispered. "I don't want to say over the phone," he said. "Come by the office tomorrow morning. Bring nothing and wear something nice. We need to discuss options." I hung up, staring at the dark house around me, the same house filled with the same silence. A clause. Conditional. My blood felt both colder and sharper than it had when I first learned they tried to sell the place. I went to sleep thinking of Grandma's hands, the way she used to press my back when she wanted me to be brave. I woke up deciding I was ready for whatever was coming next. Peter's office always smelled like dust and lemon polish, the kind of place that had seen too many secrets outlive their owners. He was already standing when I walked in. There was a single envelope on his desk with my grandmother's handwriting on it. My chest tightened the second I saw the slanted loops of her R. She wanted this delivered only if certain conditions were met, Peter said, motioning for me to sit. "What conditions?" He sighed. "Specifically, if your parents attempted to sell, transfer, or otherwise misrepresent ownership of the property." I blinked at him. "You're kidding." He shook his head. "She saw this coming, Evan. She had the clause written into the will the same day she added your name to the deed." My stomach dropped as he handed me the letter. The envelope was thin and fragile, like it might crumble if I breathed wrong. I slid my thumb along the seal and pulled out one page. The handwriting wasn't elegant, just honest. "If you're reading this, it means the people who raised you tried to take what isn't theirs. Don't be gentle." I wasn't. I stared at the words. Grandma Ruth had been kind to a fault, but she had steel under her skin. I kept reading. "I left them enough money to live. I left you the house. But if they tried to sell it, they forfeit their inheritance entirely. Everything else, investments, savings, trust accounts, transfers to you immediately. I know you'll use it wisely. They won't." I looked up at Peter, speechless. He nodded. "There's a trust account attached to her estate. Roughly $78,000. It's yours now. Legally, they have zero claim." I felt dizzy. She planned this. She anticipated this, he corrected. Your grandmother wasn't naive. She saw how your parents treated you. She called it practical love. Her words, not mine. My throat tightened. Practical love. That was exactly what she would have called it. What about the business loan? I asked. Peter's expression changed again. That's where it gets interesting. He opened another file. Your father's company listed the house as collateral for 2 separate credit lines, not one. Both are now flagged for review since we confirmed the title issue. If the bank pushes forward, his entire company will be audited. I leaned back in the chair. So he's cornered. Completely, Peter said. But there's one more thing. Your brother Mark recently applied for a mortgage. The lender contacted me this morning. Your co-signature on the car loan tanked his credit score. He's been denied. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not satisfaction, not yet, but the clarity of inevitability. Every debt, every cruelty, every smug word was circling back on them like gravity reclaiming what it was owed. Peter studied me. Do you want to press charges for the forgery now? Not yet, I said. I want them to see it all crumble before I even lift a finger. That night, my phone blew up. Emily, what did you do? Dad says the bank froze his accounts? Mom's crying. Mark's losing it. This is insane, Evan. Dad, you don't understand the damage you're causing. You're destroying your own family. You think Grandma would be proud of this? Mom, please. We made mistakes, but this? You're ruining everything we built. I read them all one by one, then turned my phone face down on the kitchen counter. Everything they built was built on me, on my silence, on my kindness, on my willingness to play the loser in their success story. They used me like wallpaper, necessary for the picture, invisible in the room. Not anymore. I took Grandma's letter and tacked it above the old fireplace, right where her portrait used to hang. Her handwriting, firm and steady, stared back at me in the half-light. Don't be gentle. I wasn't. And for the first time in my life, I realized that my revenge wasn't about anger anymore. It was about inheritance. Not the money, but the strength she'd buried in me without me even noticing. By the time I agreed to meet them, the fallout had already begun. Dad's company had lost 2 major contracts. The bank had frozen his business account pending review. Their wine country weekends had become arguments about overdue bills and bad credit. When Mom called, her voice wasn't sharp anymore. It was brittle. Evan, can we please talk? Just once, face to face. I said yes. Not because I owed them that, but because I wanted to see them when the truth came out. We met at a diner off Shaw Avenue. The same place Dad used to take us after Sunday church, before everything rotted. They were already there when I walked in. Mom with her sunglasses on indoors, Dad staring into his untouched coffee. Neither of them looked powerful anymore. Dad broke the silence first. You've made your point, he said. We get it. You're angry. I sat down slowly. Angry doesn't cover it. Mom reached across the table. We didn't mean for it to go this far. Then why did you forge my name? I asked. Her hand froze midair. Dad exhaled sharply. You found that. I did. He rubbed his temple. It wasn't what it looks like. Then what is it? I asked. Because it looks like my parents tried to erase me for cash. He stared at me, long enough that I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said something I'll never forget. You were never supposed to have that house, Evan. That was a mistake. My stomach twisted. A mistake. Yes, he said. Your grandmother was confused. She didn't understand how complicated the finances were. She didn't know how much we had invested into maintaining that property. That house was our safety net. Mom added quietly, we needed it. I leaned forward. Needed it enough to make me homeless? Dad's jaw clenched. You don't understand. We did what we had to do. You've always been. He stopped himself. Say it, I told him. He looked right at me. You've always been the weak link. We thought if you had to survive without us, you might finally become someone worth respecting. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't shock. It was something worse, recognition. Because I'd heard versions of that all my life. You could be more. You could do better. You're wasting potential. Mom leaned in. We pushed you because we love you. I laughed, short and hollow. You pushed me because you couldn't stand being embarrassed by me. Dad's eyes narrowed. That's not true. Then why'd you tell people I was working part-time when I was paying your property taxes? He didn't answer. His silence was confirmation. And then Mom broke, words spilling out like she'd been holding them for years. Do you know what it's like watching other parents brag about their kids? About Mark's promotion? Emily's firm? And then they ask about you and all I can say is, Evan works in IT support? Do you know how that feels? I stared at her. So you ruined my life because you were embarrassed at dinner parties? Tears streaked her makeup. We just wanted more for you. No, I said, voice shaking. You wanted more from me. My paycheck, my credit, my name on your loans, my silence while you used Grandma's house like a trophy. You wanted me to make your life easier, not better. Dad slammed his palm on the table, coffee sloshing over the rim. We built this family. Everything we did was for its survival. Funny, I said. You built it on me and then decided I was disposable. He glared at me. You're not the victim here. You've turned into a vindictive little man. Just like Grandma, I said, cutting him off. Because she saw what you were and made sure I'd be the one left standing when you finally showed your true faces. The air went still. Mom looked up, startled. What did you say? You heard me. She planned for this. She knew you'd try to take the house. She left a clause in her will. You broke it the moment you forged my signature. Her eyes went wide. That's impossible. I reached into my jacket and placed Grandma's letter on the table. Read it. Mom's hands shook as she unfolded the paper. Dad tried to grab it, but I slid it away. Don't. You had your chance to tell the truth. I stood up. You wanted to know what it feels like to be powerless? To watch your comfort slip away. You're about to find out. Mom started crying again, quietly this time. Dad just stared down at the tabletop, jaw tight. Neither of them tried to stop me as I walked away. Outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner. For the first time, I understood what Grandma meant when she said people show you who they are. They hadn't wanted me gone because I was a failure. They wanted me gone because I was the reminder that they failed, at empathy, at decency, at love. And now, stripped of their house, their money, and their pride, they were finally left with the one thing they always accused me of having too much of: nothing. The sheriff's notice went up on a Thursday morning, nailed to the porch post in bright yellow paper. Eviction enforcement. 48 hours to vacate. Peter had sent me a text. It's done. I drove to the house later that day. The yard was empty except for a few boxes and a broken lamp. My parents' cars were in the driveway, doors open, clothes spilling out. The house that once looked like a magazine spread now looked like a crime scene. When I stepped out of my car, Mom was sitting on the front steps, head in her hands. Dad stood by the moving truck, barking instructions that nobody seemed to follow. Mark was pacing, phone glued to his ear. Emily wasn't there. Peter said she'd stopped answering everyone days ago. Dad saw me first. You happy now? He shouted. You've ruined your own bloodline over a goddamn house. I walked up the path slowly. No, Dad. You ruined it the moment you decided a house was worth more than your son. He laughed bitterly. You think this makes you powerful? You'll end up just like us. Alone. Difference is, I said quietly, I earned my solitude. Mom stood up, eyes swollen. Evan, please. You got everything you wanted. We're leaving. Can't we just stop this now? I looked at her, then at the truck. You wanted to teach me a lesson, remember? Rock bottom, tough love, all that. I'm just making sure you graduate from your own curriculum. She flinched. Dad turned away, muttering something about betrayal. Mark hung up his phone and came toward me, red-faced. You tanked my credit. You screwed my future, he said. I nodded. Funny. That's how I felt when you paid someone to throw me out. He stepped closer, fists clenched. You think this is justice? No, I said. It's balance. The sheriff's deputy arrived a few minutes later. The sound of his cruiser pulling up made the whole scene suddenly small, like a performance winding down. He looked at me, then at my parents. "You the owner?" "Yes, sir," I said. He nodded once. "They'll be off the property by tonight." When the truck finally pulled away, I stood there watching it disappear down Pine Avenue. No shouting, no gloating, just quiet. Inside, the house smelled like lemon cleaner and ghosts. The living room was empty except for a single folded piece of paper on the mantel. Mom's handwriting. "We never wanted to hurt you. We just didn't know how to love someone we couldn't fix." I read it twice, then set it back down. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, the floors, the windows I'd cleaned as a kid. Every echo felt like Grandma's voice. Steady, grounded, sure. That night, I ordered a mattress and a small couch online. I made myself a cheap dinner and ate it sitting on the floor. I didn't feel triumphant, just finished. A week later, Peter called. "It's official," he said. "The bank released the liens. The audit closed. Your father's company is dissolving. And the trust transfer cleared." "How much?" I asked. "After taxes and penalties?" $91,000. I let out a slow breath. "Send it to my account." I spent part of the money furnishing the house modestly, a few things that felt like me, not like them. The rest went into savings and an emergency fund. I started my new job the following Monday. IT support again, better pay, better people. One afternoon, as I sat at my desk, my phone buzzed. A text from Mark. "You win." I stared at it for a long time before replying. No, I just stopped losing. That weekend, I drove out to the cemetery. I brought coffee, 2 cups, and sat by Grandma's headstone. "Guess you were right," I said quietly. They showed me who they were. I believed them. The sun was setting behind the oaks, throwing gold light across the marble. I could almost hear her laugh, that soft, tired chuckle she'd use when I overcomplicated things. "I'm okay now," I whispered. Finally. When I got back home, I walked through the door, set my keys on the counter, and looked around the quiet living room. The house didn't feel like theirs anymore. Felt like mine, finally and completely. I opened the curtains, let the last of the light spill in, and smiled to myself. For years they told me rock bottom would teach me something. They were right. It taught me how to climb without ever letting them back up.